good morning, everyone. This feels like such a special opportunity to not only make time to come together, but to celebrate our wonderful profession, and as well as that, International Women's Day. I'm really honoured to be here with so many of you this morning and with such esteemed colleagues. And I know that collectively we have a lot to say about women and women social workers in leadership. When I started thinking about this session quite a long while ago now, I immediately panicked. I thought, what on earth am I going to say to people that hasn't been said before, and by those far wiser and more experienced than I am? I then realised that whatever it is I was going to say had to be done in about 10 minutes and panic more. How do you condense such an important subject that affects so many into a session like this? I realised pretty fast that you can't, and nor should you try. And then I gave up and went for a run. And when I say run, I mean glass of wine. But what that initial panic did give rise to was an important opportunity for me to stop and reflect back on my experience over many years now of being a woman leader. And so all I can do at acknowledgement of that, and of hearing from the three awesome women leaders that will be talking to you after me, is to tell you a little bit about what it's looked like to me. I'm going to share some thoughts with you and pose some challenges, some of which I have ideas about and some of which I don't have answers to yet. That reflection that I mentioned took me right back to my early days when I was thrown into management at a very young age, having volunteered to act up as a social work team leader in a child protection service because no one else would do it, and there were reasons. Of blindly feeling my way through this new world of being the supervisor rather than the supervisee, and of people with lots more experience than me. Of managing budgets and HR paperwork that I'd never seen before. And of dealing with the comments that lasted for a few years of that young whippersnapper telling me what to do. The sidelong glances and skepticism, usually from older men. The huddles by those older men in corners for discussions that I should have been included in. And bear in mind, this was only 20 years after legislation in Ireland where if you were married, you were legally required to give up work. Sometimes it didn't feel like much had changed. And of course, the loneliness of no longer being one of the team, of conversations stopping when I came into a room. And it struck me once again, as it has on many occasions since, that we brilliantly grow our own in social work, but then we leave them alone to work it out themselves. Our early management and leadership training needs looking at, and how we ensure that our young managers have what they need to survive and thrive, and that those looking up to them are encouraged to consider that journey themselves, not put off it. We need to think about who's waiting below and looking up, and what they are being shown in the meantime. Our profession is already full of leaders, and as well as those embarking on the traditional route on up to director or assistant director level and equivalent, we also need to ensure that we make room for those leaders in practice, the social workers that want to build the sophistication of their practice and be acknowledged for it, so that we recognise and reward those in the same way that we would, for example, a consultant in medicine, someone who's at the top of their game, but not necessarily in the traditional management hierarchy of an organisation. And if it was difficult for me at the start, with every door opened, every opportunity available, where I saw people I could look up to who looked like me, how much more difficult is it for our colleagues from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds who have been pushing for too long against closing doors, doors that are firmly closed and bolted, or not being shown where the door is in the first place. It's great too to see that finally starting to change, and to have programmes like the Bali Network creating some of those spaces and opportunities. But it's still too slow and too little. And on this International Women's Day, and the morning after we have heard about one woman's description of her very public experience of racism and inequality, it reminds me that we still have a long way to go as a profession and as fully equal women colleagues. So that was the start of my leadership journey, which has been long and checkered and has ultimately led to my current role, which I love, leading our new national regulator alongside my colleagues. Because there's really nothing better than when you do find your tribe and everything seems to fall into place. But like so many, my road has not been a linear one. There have been a few potholes along the way, a few blind alleys, and one or two dead ends. Right from my early days, I've always felt the need to achieve, survive, more, higher, better, etc. And I have used the broad shoulders I have to build the resilience that I thought I needed. We all know that resilience is something that is talked about a lot in social work. And I'm glad now that something that was seen as a must-have is increasingly being challenged. For me, my resilience meant I carried on when I should have stopped. I didn't take leave when I should have. I worked through weekends and into the night. I carried on rather than taking time to grieve for a significant loss in my life, the death of my daughter. I didn't reach out for help. And eventually, and unsurprisingly, became stuck. My career stalled, I made bad choices and ended up in a job that I hated and that didn't align with my values. I thought at that point that leadership meant knowing all of the answers, taking it all on, and that my team needed command and control. And it wasn't until I took some time out to think about what I really wanted that things changed significantly. I thought about what success looks like to me and not what it means to others or what their traditional definition might be. And I know it's been said before, but comparison really is the thief of joy. I started to listen more to that important inner conversation and to ignore that other thief that takes up space there, you know, the one who tells you that you're not good enough. I'm still learning on both of those counts and probably always will be, but that's okay too. And one of the biggest lessons that I have learned is that the most effective leaders share their vulnerabilities, and that authenticity is more important than pretending you know it all, of the importance of kindness. Now I try to give others the space to develop and be the best version of themselves. Now my team know who I am and I know them, or at least the parts they choose to share with me. Now I know that I will never have all the answers, but actually what's more important in my position is to have all the questions, to create a platform for bigger and better answers, and to surround myself with good people and then get out of their way. And also, really importantly, to surround myself with those expert users of social work services who I continue to learn so much from every day and that I know continue to shape my leadership and approach. There's a reason that fearless is one of the values of Social Work England, but it's a healthy fearless, not a reckless one. It's a fearless that is equally true and applicable to all of us, to face your fears and setbacks with the mindset of, this could be our greatest opportunity. Let's walk through the door and take a look. About being right on the edge of your comfort zone and sometimes outside it, where the best learning and the most creativity often happens. So while it's a long way from the pop star I wanted to be as a child when I grew up, and at least I've not inflicted that on anyone, in the words of an actual star, the great and incomparable Dolly Parton, find out who you are and do it on purpose. And find your fearless. Walk through that door and take a look, because you never know where it might lead you. Happy International Women's Day, everyone. Thanks for listening to some of my story. And now I'm delighted to hand over to Rashida Baig, MBE, who is Head of Service at the London Borough of Croydon.
Thank you, Sarah. That was so beautifully and eloquently put, and really made me think about my own journey as you were speaking. I did the same thing when I was asked to reflect on my journey and what I might be saying today, and it made me think back to my early years. My parents told me when I was young I could be whatever I wanted to be. The message was clear: work hard, get an education, and sky is your limit. In my primary years, my choice of career vacillated between being a scientist or an astronomer or a doctor. I was a keen fan of Star Trek. All my pocket money between the ages of 7 and 10 went on publications for young scientists. At the time, we lived in East London. But in 1973, my family decided to move back to Pakistan. I was 9 years old. The only life I had known was here in England. This was definitely a punctuation point of my formative years. Gradually, the world was not so black and white. Two moments stick out. My mum asked me to wash my brother's socks. A simple enough chore. My reaction was, why? Does he wash mine? The response, but he's your brother. The first signal to me that boys and girls were perhaps perceived differently and to have different roles. Another memory came to my mind. My grandmother asked me to help me with some chores. I said I had homework to do. I was used to the cardinal rule, homework comes first. My grandmother's response, you will always be in the kitchen, however much you learn. I remember a surge of uncontrollable rage and I stamped my feet. I told her I will not end up just in the kitchen. Notably, I never learnt to cook until I reached adulthood. Perhaps in the back of my mind, it somehow I equated cooking with female subjugation. Despite the promises of further education, I was married at 17. I was the eldest granddaughter of a middle-class family, and it was expected. I had been socialised into accepting these societal norms for a British Muslim, young woman of Pakistani origin, patriarchal structures reinforced by the women of the family. Bell Hooks speaks powerfully about the imperialism of patriarchy, the privilege of all men in society, whether black or white, to oppress women. As a young mother, I was juggling parenting and caring responsibilities, and remember telling my friend that I felt my brain was mush. Feeling my frustration, she introduced me to the world of distance learning through the Open University. I was reinfected with the bug for learning and was supported, to be fair, by both my parents and my partner. They were my allies in this journey. 6 years part-time for my BA, a year and a half for adult teaching qualifications, 3 years part-time for my DIPSWA, 2 years post-qualifying studies. 12 years later, I was convinced nothing was actually going to get in my way. It was notable. I had no difficulty in getting the social work roles. I was passionate about the work and really committed to translating those social work values I had learnt into practice. I got my first 4 management roles the first time I interviewed for them. This took me into middle management. My belief was that a strong work ethic, having technical expertise and practice wisdom was all that was needed for the next role as a practice leader. I found that I was seriously mistaken, and so clearly illustrated again in the work of Bell Hooks. Ain't I a Woman? She talks about the struggles of sexism and racism and how inextricably intertwined they are. Leadership interviews were more of a challenge. I didn't expect to get my first one. I hadn't convinced myself. I'm sure I was beset by imposter syndrome during the interview, so convincing anyone else was going to be a challenge. However, as I progressed with interviews, something interesting began to emerge. Feedback like, you did an impeccable interview, but it was about fit. That really bamboozled me. What on earth was that? You either answered the question and scored more than others, or you did not. There was no evidence base to this, said my logical mind. You are appointable, but the other candidate was a better fit. You have lots of operational experience, but not enough strategic experience. And then the next interview, you have so much strategic experience, but not enough operational experience. I recall talking to my sister about how I was struggling to make sense of what was being fed back to me. She was going through very similar experiences in the US and suggested I look at the work of Sylvia Hewitt. Performance, hard work and sponsors get top talent recognised, she says, and promoted, but leadership potential is not enough to level men and women into the executive space. There's a gap between merit and success, which is difficult to understand. The roles are given to those who look and act the part. Research by the Centre for Talent and Innovation revealed that the top jobs often elude women and professionals of colour because they lack executive presence or underestimate its importance, and they simply do not get the guidance they need to acquire it. What is executive presence, I asked myself. Well, there are three pillars: gravitas, exuding confidence, grace under fire, acting decisively. Yes, that all made sense. Showing integrity, demonstrating emotional intelligence, polishing reputation. That was an interesting one. Projecting vision. Great speaking skills, yeah, I could understand that. Ability to command a room, ability to read an audience, yes, all necessary. But the final one was appearance. This counts largely as a filter through which communications, skills and gravitas become more apparent. Central to looking like a leader is good grooming and physical attractiveness, said the research. Both, I would add, are subjective concepts. The research uncovered why women and professionals from Black, Asian and minority ethnic groups struggle with executive presence. There's an intrinsic tension between conforming to corporate culture and remaining true to oneself. Executive presence is elusive depending on the culture of the organisation you find yourself in. Whether we like it or not, first impressions matter. Research conducted by the Harvard Medical School suggests that others assess your likability, trust, worthiness and attractiveness in 250 milliseconds, a quarter of a second, based simply on what they see. Credibility is yours to win if you look that part. Coming back to me, I'm a Black woman, 5'2". My family say that's a stretch, who covers her head. And if I'm honest, I'm overweight. Research says that sex, height and weight all matter. Notably, women and professionals from Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities face a narrow bandwidth of acceptability than white male counterparts. It is only with the support of a coach that I made the link between not just thinking about fitting into an organisation, but turning it on its head and thinking about whether a specific organisation was the right place for what I brought, and did it reinforce my values. Note, I do not use the word fit purposefully. I would like to think that wherever I go, I'll add to the culture rather than fit. Another great idea from a sponsor. Women are just not making it to the top, despite making gains in middle and senior management. What keeps them under that glass ceiling is not necessarily a male conspiracy, but a lack of male and female advocacy. Women who are qualified to lead do not have the powerful backing necessary to inspire, propel and protect them through the perils of upper management. In one word, they lack sponsorship. Women are more reluctant to use the relationship capital they have built up. Many feel going ahead because who you know is inherently unfair. Even when they're overlooked, they feel hard work alone will succeed in turning heads. Although I've been on a leadership programme, these concepts are not specifically discussed, and one can understand why. Inherent are ideas of unconscious and conscious bias and discrimination, but it is only by understanding what is at play that the playing field can be levelled. Finally, I would say I've had both white and Black male and female allies and sponsors along the way, from whom I've learned a lot. I have finally got that practice leader role I felt I was ready for 3 years ago. The journey has just been a little longer and harder. So for those of you who are on a similar path, don't despair. Your next job is around the corner. Happy International Women's Day, and I'd like to hand over to Isabel Trowler, Chief Social Worker for Children.
Hi, everybody. So thanks, Rashida. That was really entertaining and interesting, and I now know what the presence is. I have quite an echo going on, so I hope you can hear me okay. So I've been a senior leader for 20 years, and I didn't think much about my own personal barriers to becoming a senior leader, because frankly, I haven't had many. I'm white, I'm middle class, I'm in a very strong female orientated profession. So I think less about becoming a senior leader, but I've had to think much more about staying as a senior leader. The greatest exposure to sexism in my professional life has been without doubt in this role. In social media, I am trolled relentlessly, portrayed through hypersexual metaphors, references to sexually transmitted diseases, portrayed as the ditzy, brainless blonde. It's so shocking. And the most shocking is that some of this stuff is created and circulated by social workers. It's deeply sexist and such obvious tropes. And as women, we're programmed through the whole of our lives to be alert to this kind of attack. And because of my role and the public facing nature of it, this also exposes me to some very, very serious threats, including death threats. Misogyny is a continuum. Now, these conversations get you into debates about power and about how power shifts, and the debates about punching down and punching up. So I'm a woman with power, but in the scenarios that I'm describing, a man wants to degrade me publicly and has cheerleaders. So for me to act, is that punching up or is it punching down? Over the weekend, I listened to John Ronson's absolute brilliant So You've Been Publicly Shamed. Read it. It gets to the heart of these debates. Debates about power and shift. And it's hugely important to recognise and work through these as a woman finding her way. I really like the systemic concept of the social graces. There's a really nice piece by Basma recently where Roland Coombs, a family systemic therapist and clinical lead at the Centre for Systemic Social Work, describes their usefulness. It's a mnemonic. It helps us remember key features that influence personal and social identity. So gender, race, age, class, etc. And you can add to it endlessly. So it helps name power differentials that differ according to place, time, culture. And the beauty of the graces is that they are fluid. So I don't think there's anything fixed about women in leadership. It depends on who you are, what class you are, what race you are, your age, and how that part of you is represented and responded to in different types of institution. I've worked with a lot of women and I've worked with a lot of men, and it does seem to me that there are differences in how we operate. And these are really sweeping generalisations, so I apologise in advance. So on being busy, men are really keen to tell you how busy they are, but in general, it's because they want to get a message across to you that what they're doing is so much more important than what you're asking them to do. And women are also really keen to tell you how busy they are, but usually it's because they're asking for your help to make them less busy. Claire Chamberlain, who runs the Practice Leader Development Programme, who some of you know, says that the women on the course tend to wait until they feel competent before they take their leap into senior positions, whereas men are much more likely to leap anyway. I am asked quite a lot to have career conversations, and I'm always really happy to do that. It's always women who ask. Men rarely do. Now that's really interesting. Women seem to struggle way more than men with the decision to become more senior at the same time as having children or managing other caring responsibilities. If you're interested in moving up the ladder, and not everyone is, and we definitely need to create a system where we have much highly paid, highly regarded practitioner roles. But for those that are wanting to move into senior roles, but they have worries about those caring responsibilities, I always say move into senior, better paid jobs as quickly as possible, because you will be no busier than a frontline practitioner, but you have so much more control. But you do need to feel comfortable with the weight of responsibility. There are lots of things that we can all do about encouraging women into leadership roles, but I fundamentally believe that the single most important thing that an individual can do is that you help others up that ladder, that you spot potential talent when you're a team manager or a supervisor or a director of children's services or a chief social worker, and you spot talent at the most junior levels that you can reach, and you make a beeline for them and you help them get through, but they must get there on their own merit. But you can inspire and encourage and push. As leaders and organisations, there are lots of ways of systematising these kind of sentiments. But as soon as you're in a position of authority, team manager, etc., I do think the most important thing that you can do is to create a culture of kindness and flex, as well as ambition and opportunity. You have to let people roll. But if you're doing the rolling, you have to be good at your job and you have to deliver for the people above you. And as women thinking about leadership, this is why it's really important to research who you work for, You have to get the measure of your boss, and you have to try and get a sense of organisational mood. And you also have to set out your stall from the beginning. So I have to dip out of this session absolutely sharp at 11:40 because I'm taking my son to a medical appointment, and there's just no debate about that. When I first came into this role, and I hadn't actually started, I had a call from the Secretary of State's private office who said, the Secretary of State wants to see you on such and such a time. And I said, oh, that's so exciting, but I can't make that time or date. And they said, but the Secretary of State really wants to see you. And I said, yeah, and I really want to see them, but I can't make that date or time. And they said, but why can't you make that date or time? And I said, because it's sports day. And then they just left me alone. So before I end, I just wanted to also say something about women and leadership and COVID. We are predominantly a female-led profession. And I just wanted to say that the steady state that the leadership has provided going through COVID, that we have been such a strong part of the public sector response, very calm, very supportive. The sense of workforce or attention on workforce well-being has been really striking, and has been able to just keep that kind of steady state calm position that we've really needed. And I have to say the blokes have been really good at it too. It has really shone through. So happy International Women's Day, and over to Fran Ledra, Chief Social Worker for Adults.
Thank you very much, Isabel. And so one of the disadvantages of going last is that I'm probably going to say things that you've already heard from the other great speakers that have just come before me. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share a rather personal story with you about my journey into leadership, which I think echoes a lot of what other people have just said. Now, I'm hoping you can see these slides. I'm going to kind of move on to the next one. Okay, so first of all, I've done presentations before, and I've often talked about my mother. Well, that beautiful woman in that picture there is my mother when she was 19 years of age. And one of the things that always strikes me when people ask about leadership is that I kind of don't always think there's an amazing mystery around it. I kind of think people are leaders at many different points of their lives, and somebody like my mum, that's her at 19. She would never ever have seen herself as a leader, and when I tell her now about the fact that I used her in a beautiful picture in presentations, I'm very lucky I've still got my mum with me. She always kind of just thinks, you know, the humility in her just is like, oh, that's absolutely lovely, darling, but you know, of course I've never seen myself as a leader. But there are things about my mum that were absolutely extraordinary when I was younger and I was growing up, and that kind of taught me to get onto this path and this journey. Her tremendous compassion, I had it from my father as well, but more so from my mother. Her tremendous compassion, her respect, her honesty, her humility and her loyalty. And just to tell you a little story, when I was about 14, well, between the ages of 12 and 14, I suffered quite a lot of bullying at school. I mean, some of it actually was quite horrendous. And my mother was always kind of alongside of me, although it didn't always help to go up to school and talk on my behalf, because sometimes that made it worse. She was always alongside of me. She was always warm. She would always talk to me about how I was feeling. And at the same time, and she had befriended a local woman who was schizophrenic. Now, at that time, we're talking back in the 70s, and people with schizophrenia, you know, the only kind of comparison people used to make was things like the film Psycho. They really honestly didn't understand about mental health, and you know, and we still have a journey to go in terms of understanding mental health. But my mother had befriended this woman and was helping her shop, and when she wasn't institutionalized in hospital settings, this woman would be home, and she would live just around the corner to us, and everybody would bully her and call her names. And my mother befriended her. We would go shopping with her, and I was never frightened by her like other people seem to be frightened by her, because the trust I had in my mum. Now, my mum again wouldn't see herself as a leader, as I said, but what my mum did is she sort of stood above everybody else, and she kind of was brave, and she said, well, you know, this is a woman who needs our support. And she taught me some really, really strong messages, which I think are really important for anybody who's aspiring to be a leader today. So these are the things, and these are her words, and these are the words I remember. And I think Sarah said it right at the beginning, that be kind is there. That was really instilled in me, despite the fact that I was in the situation I was in, and some days didn't even want to wake up and go to school. My mum used to be, you still got to be kind. I was never anxious. I never felt angry or angst by my circumstances because of the compassion my mother showed me. People get scared and they don't understand and they scapegoat. It's a real saying that she says, and my nan used to say it as well, and it's so true. And you never know somebody else's circumstances was another one she used to say. And this idea of being fair, I suppose that's where my whole values of equity come from now. That idea of being fair is so important to me. It didn't feel fair to me the way they treated the woman that my mother befriended. And it certainly didn't seem fair to me the way I was being treated. So that kind of real strong sense of injustice and social justice was really born in that fire in my belly, I think, was born from those kind of experiences. Don't judge a book by its cover. I mean, what a saying. I mean, my mum used to say that, and my nan used to say that. And there is often another point of view. And treat others as you'd want to be treated. I mean, we kind of talk of that, don't we, in today in our values as respect, but actually my mum just used to say, don't do to somebody else what you wouldn't want to be done to yourself. And of course, as I've already said, be kind. And then again, if people who probably have heard me speak before, I use Maya Angelou quotes all the time. There was something about her poetry. The poem Still I Rise was really strong for me when I was going through that period of time. I came across it. I don't think it was my mother who introduced it to me. Somebody introduced me to Maya Angelou's poetry. And I became massively inspired by her. And one of the things she's got with all of these women on this slide is this just abundance of courage. And I think, again, Sarah said it right in the opening. Courage is absolutely important. You do have to have a bit more courage, I think, for a woman to kind of succeed, if you like, and to reach those kind of heights of leadership over and above what other men achieve, just because we kind of don't always start off on the even footing. The woman in the middle, Margaret Aspinall, I mean, I had the pleasure of meeting her at Basra event a couple of years ago. What a woman of courage. She wouldn't see herself as a great leader. I mean, she had tragic circumstances. Her son, James, at 18 years of age, went to a football match. It was the Hillsborough disaster and he never came home. And she has fought over a number of years to get justice for her son and all the other people that died on that tragic day. She doesn't see herself as a remarkable leader, but my goodness, courage and abundance, to me, she's an absolutely exceptional woman. The ones in the corner there are when in 1982, I did kind of come out of that period of time where I was being bullied. I think anybody at university would never have thought that I was that once meek, mild person that wouldn't say boo to a goose. And those women, they're Greenham Common women. And I can remember thinking it wasn't, really wasn't right that there was going to be there were these weapons that could, just completely destroy the earth. And I need to go and do something about it. And I joined the women at Greenham Common. What a fantastic group of women. That's where I learned about female camaraderie. That's where I really learned that, being in a group of women is absolutely special. And still to this day, being in a group of wonderful friends and women, I really just enjoy that fantastic female intelligence, that female camaraderie. That was a great experience for me. And I wasn't kind of camping out there all the time, but it was kind of my first kind of introduction, I suppose, to a bit of activism and doing something that really made me feel quite passionate. And then, of course, people like Rosa Parks, and we've got Helen Keller, and then, of course, we've got Emmeline Pankhurst there. Extraordinary women who kind of stood up for things that they believed in, and made such a massive difference as well. And one of the other things that I found from those early experiences from my mum was I kind of thought at that stage, well, one day I want to do something that really makes a difference. I didn't think about, I want to be a leader. I thought, I just want to do something that really makes a difference to other people's lives. They're extraordinary women. And then something that's really extremely drives me, and again, I think again Sarah said it at the beginning, is that authenticity. I think it's really true. Don't let people put you in a box of what your leadership style is. I like to say I'm agile. I like to say that I do different things, and I can kind of move with different times. We are in a different world now. We even work differently. So there's that kind of idea, isn't there, that we've got to have a type of training, and it's got to kind of get us to a point. And of course, all that stuff really helps, and it helps with your development. But just be your authentic self. Continue to be self-aware. Always be honest as well. And honestly, you know, I still do things. I trip over my words. I still sometimes will arrive at a meeting and I will not be prepared, and I have to kind of say, I'm sorry, I'll have to get that information for you later. Don't put leaders up on a pedestal, because actually they're just ordinary people that just happen to have got to where they've got to. And there's something about that kind of sticking with that authenticity and honesty. I absolutely still believe, and it sounds a little bit kind of like fluffy, doesn't it? But I do believe you have to lead with your heart. As Isabel said, you know, you don't, you know, just because you're in a particular role and there's some important meeting coming up, if there's something else that you need to be doing instead, something that's way more important to you because that's your family, you know, you do have to kind of make that stand and kind of say, well, okay, you know, I need to kind of put, there are other priorities in my life and not just work. But also in what you're doing, again, I talk about that little bit of fire in your belly, of that leading with your heart, and really expressing yourself through what you do. And then I put mission driven, and I don't mean thumpy table mission driven. And by thumpy table mission driven, nothing annoys me more than somebody who's trying to put forward a point, but he's doing it in a dogmatic way. And I call it thumpy table, because actually you can put your point across, and you can put it across without having to shout, without having to be too dogmatic about what you want. I think it's really important that we have that mission drive, especially in our profession. I think health and social care leaders do generally have that, and that it's really important to hold on to that, and hold on to that kind of the humility with it as well. You can be mission driven and you don't have to kind of shout and be thumpy table, as I say. And then finally, just my top tips if you want to kind of you know, if you want to kind of stretch yourself and you do want to become a leader, and I absolutely think everybody has the potential to do that at different stages in their life and at different levels in their life, I'd say absolutely be yourself and be authentic. Be resilient. You do need resilience. That's the one thing I think it's very hard to get to a position without resilience and a huge amount of courage. Don't change to fit into a leadership style. Let it fit in with you. I really think that's important. Don't let people put you in a little box as to what style you are. Challenge yourself. And it's okay to feel uncomfortable. One of the first things when I got this role was I thought, my goodness, I'm never going to be able to stand up in front of a lot of people and talk and do a presentation. And here I am talking to, I think, over 1,000 of you now. You have to challenge yourself and sometimes push yourself through what I call the pain thresholds. You have to make yourself sometimes do things that feel uncomfortable. And that's good. And it's quite character building. And it pushes you through a certain limit. And the other thing is always do the right thing. It never fails to surprise me, really, that when you're grappling with a particular issue and you're in a position of authority, that in the end, it always comes back down to, well, what is the right thing to do? And I've always found that if you do the right thing, you do end up absolutely not just doing the right thing, but it's the right thing for not just the people, but for yourself, for the organisation. It's usually the most efficient thing to do as well. And so I think that's really important. And then just finally, just want to leave you, because Maya Angelou is my absolute hero. Just want to leave you with a quote from her, which I always remember, and I always think when you're talking about this kind of courage that you need. And she said, stand up and realise who you are, and that you will tower above your circumstances. And she also says courage is the most important of virtues, because without courage, you can't practice any other virtue consistently. And that's me. Thank you very much. And now I am handing back to Armina.
Thank you very much, Fran, and thank you to all of our speakers. I definitely think that thumpy table mission driven is going to find its way into my vocabulary now. So thank you very much for that. So we've got a few questions, so that lots of people have been really enjoying the session and have found it really inspiring. So thank you very much. I believe this question was directed for you, Sarah. So agreed, social work managers are often not properly trained, and therefore you often get poor management as a result. What do you suggest we can do to change this?
Well, I don't think there's any one solution. I think there's lots of different avenues that we can explore, and in many instances are already exploring as a profession. So we've got some great management and leadership development programs, and I think the key is just, as Isabel said, spotting and nurturing talent early, and creating really good role models, really good mentoring opportunities, really good shadowing for people that you see and admire. I think there are lots and lots of different ways, both formal and informal, that we can promote and grow our own managers, and then ensure that they have the same opportunities to access some of those more formal development programs that everybody does. I don't know if anyone else wants to comment.
Thank you, Sarah. That's really helpful. Another question, I'll come to you, Isabel, for this one. What advice will you give to someone who wants to become a leader in the field of social care, where the local authority won't be giving leadership training or management training? Is there any independent leadership training or resources that they can access?
Okay, so it depends what you mean by independent, and I think that's right, that local authorities offer very, very different levels of support. Although, you know, in my experience, most local authorities have got some level of team management, supervisory, middle management training going on. But nationally, the things that spring to my mind that I've had, you know, most involvement in, that we have the practice supervisor development programme, which is led by Research and Practice, but is a consortium of a range of different organisations. People love that course. It's an extensive programme, so you know, look into that. That we've got also the practice leader development programme. So that's for people that are in the kind of heads of service role, looking to move up into the practice leader assistant director role. That's been running for about 4 years now. In fact, Rashida was on that at some point.
Yes.
And that's a year-long programme. But also there's after you've done the programme, that we line you up with people that can coach and mentor you throughout, and then we keep that group of people with us as the practice leadership group, and that they have there's about 90 of them now actually. There's a big strong group network now. And they have a lot of contact with each other, ongoing contact with the development leaders and also the Department for Education. So that's a good one to watch out for.
And sorry, I was just going to add, there's also First Line, which is another programme that's run by Frontline, which is, you know, managers go to and find extremely helpful from a systemic base. And I just want to add, in terms of the practice development leadership programme, that is the first time that I really began to understand how the wheels of senior leadership work. And there's also Bali. I know some of us referred to it earlier, but that's specifically for Black and Asian leaders who, you know, need and want to benefit from leadership training, and it's really quite inclusive.
Thank you, Rashida. And I'm going to come back to you because actually one of these questions links to the last point that you just made. So somebody specifically asked, what do organisations need to do differently to support and promote Black women?
I think there's no one silver bullet. It is about making sure that you know, policies and procedures are, yes, they're inclusive. You can put the best policies and procedures in place, but if people on the ground don't understand how discrimination bias operates, they won't work. So making sure that the conversations about race and racism, sex and sexism are every day, and that they are that we understand from people who are experiencing discrimination on the ground about what is it that would make a difference, what is it that they think we should be doing differently. The burden isn't theirs, but the responsibility is ours in leadership. But we must ask on the ground, because unless we ask, we won't understand. The other thing that I think is really key is that, you know, being really upfront about where we can support with coaching and mentoring. There are some questions I never knew to ask because I didn't even know there was a question around it. We don't know what we don't know. And sometimes it's not training, but it's having a select few people that are mentored together that can really help. Because individually, we wonder if she would ask that stupid question, but we're in a group, somebody might have the courage to ask it. And I feel that I have never asked enough of the questions that I needed to early in my career to understand how things work. So it's always a whole range of measures that make the difference, never one thing.
Thank you, Rashida. And Fran, I saw you nodding along to that, so I'm going to also come to you again for that question as well. So what can organisations do to support and promote Black women?
So I think, well, I think what Rashida was saying about the mentoring programs is really, really important. I think some of the best organisations have fabulous mentoring programs, and also there's a growing reverse mentoring type kind of, you know, schemes that are coming up, whereby also leaders can also learn from their colleagues as well, and that's really important in this area. I think having a good plan is also really important, so that you have a plan in order to how you're going to ensure that your staff, and especially your BAME staff, have opportunities to progress. And that might well be in either in something like the race equality standards, or something like the race equality action plan, or something you might have locally. So I think there are lots of things that you can put in place in order to help and promote that work. But I think particularly, I think mentoring is really important as well.
Thank you, Fran. I'm going to come to you next, Sarah. There was a question specifically about some of the things that you said. So somebody's asked or expressed and then asked, my experience in working closely with doctors shows me that they're expected from early in their careers to exercise autonomous decision making and take responsibility. Social workers are required to submit a lot of case decisions to managers, even though they may not have practiced for some time or be nearly an expert. How can this be changed?
Thanks, Amina. That's a really good question. I think for a start, I think social workers already do on an everyday basis, no matter what level they're at in practice, make lots of decisions based on their professional assessments and analysis of whatever situation it is they find themselves in. I think quite often social workers who can be at the front line of practice don't have enough confidence in the ability and their professionalism and the knowledge that they bring to whatever scenario they find themselves faced with. And I would want all social workers to have more confidence in who they are and what they do and their professional learning and knowledge. I think what we can do as system leaders is to look at the post-qualifying landscape and look at how, number one, we streamline what can be quite a crowded professional landscape at the post-qualifying stage, and we look at the current pathways that we've got. We've got some great pathways, and we've heard about some of those, into the more formal leadership, the more traditional leadership positions. What I'd like to see us doing and working on now is creating a pathway that is really clear for those who want to remain in practice and build on the sophistication of their practice, so that there isn't a kind of an assumption that people, once they reach a certain level, will go down the traditional management route. They can go down a route where they can stay in practice, develop that sophistication and be acknowledged and rewarded for it. And there's some really exciting discussions happening at the moment about how and whether that's achievable and how we might do that.
Thank you, Sarah. So I think this is going to be the last question before we have a wrap up. So I am going to go to each of the panelists in turn. So I'll start in the order that you ran in for ease. So the question is, can any of the panelists recommend any reading material that will support in developing confidence at a strategic level? So sorry, Sarah, you went first, so I'm going to have to start with you again, and then we'll go through to Rashida, Isabel, and then Fran. Sarah, you're on mute. The joys of tech.
Joys of tech. I knew it was going to happen at some point. There are so many books out there, but one of the books that really spoke to me is a great book called Women in Leadership, and it's co-authored by Julia Gillard, who used to be the Prime Minister in Australia, and it gives accounts of really inspirational women and their leadership journeys. So people like Jacinda Ardern, people like Ellen Sirleaf, who became the first female president in Liberia, who was particularly inspiring to me at the same time as I was working in Sierra Leone, which is next door to Liberia, and a whole range of other amazing women leaders and how they got to where they are and what some of the challenges they faced along the way. So I really recommend that.
Sorry, shall I go next? Yes. Okay, so I referred to a couple of these, and I mean, I certainly found, for me, these were really helpful. One was The Sponsor Effect, Breaking Through the Last Glass Ceiling. It's by Sylvia Ann Hewlett and others, and it's from the Centre for Work-Life Policy. And then, and this is research, so I was really interested in this because it dealt with the issues of racism and sexism in a really explicit way. And the other was Executive Presence. And again, this was the Centre for Talent Innovation, and it came from Sylvia Ann Hewlett as well. I found both of these publications really helpful in helping me to unpick the unsaid, what people weren't telling me, and what my logical brain couldn't fathom. So I think that anything that helps to do that has to be a good thing. And finally, I always revisit Ain't I a Woman by Bell Hooks. I can't say enough about how that helped me to understand the connections between sexism and racism.
Okay, so I haven't read any of those books that anybody's mentioned. But anyways, I better start reading them. But and I'm not going to give you any particular books, but I do read a lot, and I suppose I think that one of the ways in which you become confident as a leader, whatever level that is and lots of people have made lots of reference to this, is that you have to know yourself, you know, and that's your greatest anchor. And so I think, you know, I read about leadership is really about people. So anything that you read is going to tell you new things about people and how people experience things differently, and the you know, huge differences there are in life experience, etc. And from a sort of professional perspective, I think the other route of confidence is knowing practice and staying close to practice. So however senior you become, do not take your eye off what's happening in practice. And I've done this throughout the whole of my career, and I'd really urge everyone to do it, is keep reading those public inquiries, keep reading serious case reviews. They will tell you an awful lot about what really happens in families and how professionals respond to that. And that always gives me confidence that I'm on the right track in the way that I lead.
So yeah, I mean, I just agree with everything that Isabel's just said. Actually, I was frantically thinking about some books, and then I mean, there is a book called The Coaching Habit by Michael Stanier, I think it is, that I can remember influenced me some time ago. But I would just say, read about people that have inspired you, but also honestly read anything by Maya Angelou, and you'll get a huge kind of sense of what leadership and all those things I talked about are about, and read poetry and read literature and anything that's kind of about people and things that are going to sort of inspire you. The leadership training and reading leadership books are great, but I think you have to have them complemented alongside a kind of a bit of a wholeness of yourself, which is about what you're bringing to it, what relationships bring to it, to make it complete. Because you can do all the leadership training and all the leadership reading, but if you haven't got that bit about yourself and the bits that give you that bit of a fire in your belly, then I don't know whether you'll become that whole and complete leader. So I'd say look at a range of different things, but also all the things that you just love reading and all the things that inspire you.
Thank you. Some really great recommendations there. We've just got a couple of minutes to wrap up, but I just wanted to pick up on a question that somebody asked about, where do you get the Practice Leader Development Programme? So I believe you mentioned that, Rashida. So can I come to you for that, please?
Yes, of course. It's actually advertised, and the information goes to every local authority. It goes to the directors and the practice leaders, and then they actually then distribute that within their networks. So really it is about we can provide details actually, see when the next programme is running. So we'll do that separately. I'll make sure you have it.
That's brilliant. So thank you very much, everybody. There's been some really inspiring reflections, and based on some of the comments that we've received via the chat, I can really see that lots of people really enjoyed it. So it's been wonderful to have you here, and particularly on International Women's Day. What a way to celebrate. So thank you so much. We have recorded this session, and the recording will be shared via our YouTube channel. So please do have a look out for that. I know a couple of people said that they would like to access it at a later point, so hopefully you'll be able to enjoy that and share that with your colleagues as well. We would appreciate it if you can take the time to complete a brief survey, which we've added to the chat, and we'll welcome any thoughts or feedback that you may have through our post-event survey or by emailing socialworkweek@socialworkengland.org.uk. And again, if you are on Twitter or social media, then please do tweet. We've got sessions throughout the week, and we'd really love it if you could join us. Thank you very much. We're running to time, which is always something that I'm really pleased about. So enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, everybody.